Before we begin, tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Let us begin. Imagine a flickering fire, shadows dancing softly across a wooden wall. The scent of baked rye bread in the air. The sound of distant hoofbeats, muffled in the twilight. Tonight, we drift into a world long gone. A world of kings and commoners, of village fairs and alleyway secrets, where even in the darkness of the Middle Ages, people sought something sweet, something salty, something we might now call junk food. But what did junk food even mean in the medieval world? What did peasants snack on after a long day in the fields? What guilty pleasures did a knight sneak in the shadows of his stone hall? You're about to find out. So, breathe in. Breathe out. Let us step softly into the cobbled streets of a medieval village, where the fire crackles, and strange smells beckon from wooden stalls. Medieval life was no feast. For the poor, food was survival. The wealthy dined on swan and spiced wine, but the common peasant, their plates were far humbler. Grains were ground by hand, stews simmered for hours, and ovens were often shared by the whole village. But when hunger struck between meals in the fields, or during a festival, something odd happened. They snacked. No, they didn't unwrap a granola bar or pop open a bag of crisps. Instead, they reached for what we might call junk food, hearty, strange, comforting things made from scraps and suet. One of the most common medieval snacks was simple dough, fried in fat. Made from flour, water, sometimes a splash of ale, and fried in lard or leftover goose grease. These chewy, crispy fritters were delicious, filling, and slightly burnt more often than not. They were dipped in honey or sprinkled with herbs. Sometimes, they were stuffed with onions or leeks. It was fast, it was cheap, and yes, it was kind of addictive. Just imagine the smell wafting from a smoky iron pan, as someone flips a misshapen round of dough, golden and bubbling at the edges. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Street food wasn't common, but during fairs and festivals, the rules bent a little. Vendors roasted scraps of meat, rabbit, chicken hearts, or bits of salted pork skewered on wooden sticks, or even bone fragments. It was chewy, overcooked, smoky, and probably delicious if you hadn't eaten meat in weeks. The rich may have had spit-roasted boar, but the poor, they settled for sizzling offcuts, dusted with salt and pepper if they were lucky. Some even soaked their meat in ale before roasting it over fire. A strange early marinade, perhaps sugar was rare. Very rare. But sweet things, people still craved them. So medieval folks improvised. They boiled down apples and pears into mush, mixed it with honey, and poured it over stale bread or nuts. Candied nuts, especially almonds and walnuts, were an elite treat, but even villagers sometimes roasted chestnuts with honey or salt. A popular junk dessert was called posset, hot milk curdled with ale or wine, sweetened, and eaten warm. Think medieval pudding, chunky, odd, but strangely comforting. Cheese was a common snack, but not the clean, sliced kind we know today. This cheese was raw, strong-smelling, and often spreadable. Made from leftover curds and stored in wooden boxes, it was eaten with flat bread or onions. Some of it had herbs. Some had mold. All of it was pungent. And it was often eaten in silence, during a break from digging ditches or mending fences. Surprisingly, pickled items were popular too. Turnips, onions, garlic steeped in vinegar, and herbs were stored in clay jars for weeks. They were salty, sour, and strong, perfect for waking up tired taste buds. Some even dipped their bread in fish oil or thickened broth, an early medieval dip. Did it taste good? Maybe not to us. But to a tired peasant, it was heaven. In port towns, dried fish was common, salted, flattened, and tough as leather. People gnawed on it like jerky. Sometimes bones, small ones from birds, were roasted until brittle, then eaten whole. This wasn't strange to them, it was practical. Calcium was calcium. Children would even chew on honeycomb or pine resin, like early chewing gum. Every medieval home had a hearth. And on slow nights, when the stew was done and the chores were over, people lingered by the fire. They'd eat toast bread directly on the flame. Roast garlic under the coals. Even melt cheese on flat rocks warmed in the embers. One popular late-night treat was spiced ale heated gently, with cinnamon and nutmeg. Paired with hot bread and butter, it was a rare comfort. In monasteries, even monks indulged now and then. Some kept jars of preserved fruits and sweet wine tucked away for feast days. Others baked almond cakes during holy festivals. These were rare, sacred treats and carefully guarded. But when they were shared, the joy was silent and deep. And now, dear listener, as the wind howls gently outside our medieval cottage, and the fire dims low, imagine yourself curled under rough wool, the scent of herbs and bread still in the air. You've walked through muddy lanes, tasted strange medieval treats, and touched history through hunger. Let this calm, forgotten world hold you, as you drift softly into sleep. And if you're still awake, backhand index pointing right, let us know in the comments where in the world are you tuning in from. Your little village helps us build ours. As the moon hangs low over the thatched rooftops, we walk once more into the simple yet surprising world of medieval life. Not through grand castles, but through food. The odd, the sweet, the fried, and the fermented. In Chapter 1, we wandered through the snacks of peasants' and villagers' makeshift meals, crusts dipped in broth, and fried dough flipped over smoky pans. But tonight, the village is different. There's music in the square. Torches flicker down muddy paths. The air smells of spice and smoke. Tonight, there's a festival. And for a moment even the poorest soul gets to eat like royalty. In the medieval world, feast days were scattered across the calendar like stars. There were over 100 holy days each year, some lasting a single evening, others stretching across a week. While most days were filled with fasting, hard labor, and thin porridge, feast days were different. The church permitted, even encouraged indulgence. Fasting was temporarily lifted. Ale flowed more freely. Markets filled with strange new smells. For peasants, these days meant one rare thing: food beyond survival. Yes, even back then, pancakes existed. Not the fluffy kind we eat today, but thin, eggy flatbreads fried in animal fat and served hot. During Shrovetide, the days before Lent, villagers would scramble to use up rich foods like milk, eggs, and fat. The result: pancake feasts, an early form of junk food celebration. Served with honey, berries, or even a bit of curdled cream, they were warm, messy, and comforting. Children raced through the streets, flipping pancakes in pans. Old women stirred batter near the fire, while fiddlers played in the square. Special ale was brewed for feast days, thicker, darker, and sometimes flavored with herbs like rosemary or even wormwood. Sometimes, vendors sold hot spiced wine, simmered with cinnamon, ginger, or clove, imported spices that cost dearly but were used sparingly to impress guests. Ale was poured into clay cups, handed out by candlelight, and shared in long toasts. Noisy, chaotic, a little tipsy, it was the medieval version of street food and music festivals. On many feast days, meat was forbidden due to religious fasting, but creativity thrived. Villagers made mock meats from lentils or fish paste, molded into animal shapes. Onion pies, layered with breadcrumbs, herbs, and butter, were a crowd favorite. In some regions, bakers created sweet sour tarts, filled with dried fruits, vinegar, and sugar substitutes like honey or date syrup. Some even added rose water or orange blossom for flavor. Luxury imports from far-off lands. It was strange, complex food, but it made people feel alive. At every medieval festival, there was a fruit seller. She'd carry a basket of apples, pears, and berries, sometimes stewed, sometimes candied over flame. One festival treat, spiced apples roasted over fire and rolled in honey and crushed hazelnuts. Some sellers boiled fruit down into fruit leather, sticky, chewy, and portable. Kids loved them. Adults pretended not to. They weren't cheap. But on a feast day, a few coins were worth it. Pies weren't just for kings. At festivals, communal ovens were open to bake small hand pies filled with meat, leeks, cheese, or even dried fruits. Sometimes sold by monks for donations, these pies were a welcome break from boiled grains and cabbage stew. The crust was thick and hard, meant to preserve the contents. You'd break it open with your hands, let the steam curl up into the cold air, and take slow, warming bites. Even the smell was enough to make someone smile. It wasn't uncommon to see small vendors roasting meats or root vegetables on open stones, especially on Saint's days. Turnips sliced and smoked. Onions blackened and sweet. Bits of rabbit or salted fish sizzling on hot flat rocks, flipped with sticks. Sometimes a bit of wild mustard was sprinkled on top, spicy, sharp, and delightful. Even the dogs gathered round, hoping for a dropped scrap. If you were lucky, a spice merchant might show up with strange powders, crystallized roots, and jars of imported nuts. He might sell you a handful of candied hazelnuts, rolled in honey and crushed with caraway. Or strange digestive cakes, hard little wafers baked with fennel and anise. Children sucked on sticks of sugar root. Elders chewed dry ginger for warmth. And lovers exchanged little fruit-stuffed pastries, wrapped in cloth like quiet gifts. Some foods were unidentifiable. A bubbling cauldron here. A strange stew there. No recipe written down, just generations of instinct. A bit of barley. A slice of dried plum. Some scraps of bacon, a dried herb, and a splash of ale. You never asked what was in it. You just hoped it warmed your bones. This was true village cooking. The kind that never tasted the same twice, but always felt familiar. And now, as the torches flicker lower, and fiddles grow quiet, the feast day winds to its end. Children sleep with sticky fingers and full bellies. The ale jugs are empty. The last onion pie has been sold. And the old woman with the pancake pan has put out her fire. All that's left is the crackle of cooling coals, and the scent of something sweet lingering in the air. You, dear listener, have wandered the festival, tasted its warmth, smelled its comfort, and felt its joy. Let that joy settle deep in your chest now. As you drift, gently, into slumber. Round pushpin, and before you sleep, tell us in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? A sleepy village in the UK, a cozy room in Canada, we'd love to know. Let your voice echo softly in our village of stories. You've been listening to Boring History for Sleep. Next time, we'll step deeper into forgotten medieval flavors. But for now, sleep well, traveler, and dream of apples roasting over flame. In many medieval homes, garlic was not just a food. It was a protector. Hung above doors. Placed near cradles. Even worn around the neck by those traveling at night. Garlic was believed to drive away illness, bad spirits, and vampires. and while it was often chopped into stews or crushed into medicinal salves, some believed too much garlic could stir up aggression, even open the body to wildness or lust. In the wrong hands, they whispered, garlic was witch's breath. Many feared the woods not because of wolves, but because of women with strange herbs. Known by some as wise women, and by others as witches. These women used food as medicine or as magic. One such recipe, toad broth. A mix of moss, wild onion, and so they claimed the belly of a boiled toad. It was said to cure coughs or curses. Other tales told of pies that caused sleep, or breads that made men forget their own names. Did these foods really exist, or were they just the fearful fantasies of a deeply superstitious time? While eggs were a staple for many villagers, they weren't always trusted. Why? Because of their shape, round, mysterious, unending. Some believed eggs represented hidden power, especially when eaten raw. Others warned that witches could use the inside of an egg to see into the future. In parts of Europe, people cracked eggs carefully. Not for the yolk, but to prevent evil spirits from climbing inside the empty shell. It was common to crush the shells completely after cooking so nothing dark could use it as a boat. A strange superstition. But in the Middle Ages, every crumb could carry a spell. The line between medicine and witchcraft was blurry. Here are just a few plants whispered about in hushed tones. Mandrake root, screamed when pulled from the ground. Believed to cure infertility, or drive you mad. Belladonna, called deadly nightshade. Beautiful purple flowers. Used in both love potions and poisons. Yarrow, carried to protect against plague, but also sprinkled in love spells. Witches were said to grind these herbs into powders, hide them in bread, or steep them into dark tea. Villagers would often refuse food from strangers. Because who knew what it might contain? Some foods weren't feared, they were cherished for their power to soothe. In certain villages, it was tradition to drink moon milk, a warm mixture of goat milk, nutmeg, cinnamon, and wildflower honey on nights of the full moon. Why? It was believed to ease troubled dreams and protect the soul while sleeping. Parents gave it to restless children. Lovers shared it after arguments. Elders drank it with slow sips, watching the stars. A small ritual. A quiet kind of magic. Beyond folklore, there were very real rules. The church banned certain foods during Lent, Fridays, and dozens of fast days throughout the year. The biggest victim, meat. But people found creative, sometimes absurd ways around this. Beavers were declared fish so their tails could be eaten. Puffins and porpoises were also allowed, because they lived in water. People ate eel pies and fish sausages, pretending it was roast pork. One monk even sculpted meat to look like bread, and bread to look like fish, just to confuse inspectors. Rules were strict. But loopholes were everywhere. Some foods were believed to stir the heart or other desires. Oysters were rare but known for their effect. Honey was often called love's syrup. Figs were whispered to be sinful if eaten slowly. But the most famous love food, rose cakes. Made from dried rose petals, flour, and syrup. Young women would bake them and give them silently to someone they adored. If he ate it, he would fall in love. Or so the stories said. But if he spat it out, well, he'd probably be cursed. Cold food was suspicious. In many towns, eating too much cold fruit was believed to cause illness or melancholy. Some said cold food let in demons, made the soul slippery, easy to take. Ice was used, rarely harvested from frozen rivers and stored in underground pits. Only the wealthy had access to it. But even then, food that was too cold was often refused. Warmth was safety. Warmth was holy. In most homes, Bread was sacred. Before slicing a fresh loaf, villagers often made the sign of the cross on its top with a knife. Why to bless it? To protect it from spirits. And, according to some, to let the devil escape if he was hiding inside. Leaving bread upside down was bad luck. Dropping bread meant someone in the family would fall ill. And giving someone burnt bread was a serious insult. Bread was not just food. It was part of the soul. And finally, the darkest corner of the medieval food world. The midnight feast. Not the kind shared among friends, but the kind whispered about in church warnings and old tales. Witches, they said, gathered at night in hidden places. They baked moon-shaped pastries, boiled wild mushrooms, ate owls' eggs and blackberries picked under moonlight. Some believed they danced around stew pots. Others claimed they feasted with demons. None of it confirmed. All of it feared. But in every village, there was always one house people avoided after dark. And so, the fire fades, and the secrets sleep. Tonight, we've explored the strange world of forbidden medieval foods. Some feared. Some faked. Some filled with myth. But in the quiet dark of the old world, even the simplest meal could hold a whisper of magic. As you rest now, may your dreams be soft, your bread warm, and your night free of toad broth. Sleep well, dear listener. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what's the weirdest food you've ever eaten? We'd love to hear your stories. As the morning mist gave way to the warmth of the sun, the dusty roads leading to medieval villages began to stir with activity. Amid the quiet footsteps of townsfolk and the creak of wooden carts, came the gentle jingling of a bell, not from a church tower, but from the front of a humble cart being pulled by a man with sun-worn hands and a satchel of secrets. He was a peddler, a traveling merchant of the Middle Ages, part salesman, part storyteller, and often, the only source of exotic or unusual treats the village would see for months. Today, he was carrying junk food. At least, by medieval standards. Let us walk slowly beside him now. The life of a wandering peddler. Peddlers were not just sellers of goods, they were carriers of curiosity. They moved from one rural hamlet to the next, bringing trinkets, tales, spices, and sweets. Many villagers waited eagerly for their arrival, not just to buy but to listen. They'd gather around the cart as children might gather for a magician. Some peddlers carried items as simple as pins or soap. But the most exciting ones, they had snacks. Unusual ones. Cheap, tasty, and not particularly nutritious. They were, in every way, medieval junk food dealers. What did they sell? Let us peek into the wooden chest at the back of the cart. Inside, wrapped in cloth and nestled among straw, are items as delightful as they are greasy. There are honey-roasted almonds, clumped together in little wax paper packets. These were made by boiling nuts in honey and then letting them dry until sticky and shiny. Next to them are wafers, thin, crispy discs made from flour and water, sometimes brushed with a bit of oil or herbs. Some were even flavored with rose water or orange peel, if the peddler had come from a city. And then, tucked into a little pot made of fired clay, candied fennel seeds. These were tiny but powerful treats used both to freshen breath and to chew on while gossiping. A medieval breath mint, if you will. And over in the far corner, wrapped in linen, are meat pies. Small, hand-held ones. Not the fresh, flaky kind we dream of today, but cold, dense, and filled with leftover meat, onions, and whatever herbs the cook had lying around. Cheap, filling, and, questionably fresh. All of this was perfect for the road. No cutlery needed. No etiquette required. Just grab and munch. The medieval food truck experience. In many ways, these carts were like ancient food trucks bringing quick, affordable eats to people who didn't want to cook or couldn't afford a full meal. Imagine a weary farmhand returning from the fields. He hears the clatter of the peddler's cart and smiles. For a few coins, he buys a fried pastry stuffed with spiced peas, hot and oily, made in the city and carried here that very morning. He doesn't sit at a table. He eats it standing by the roadside, wiping his fingers on his tunic and licking the salt from his lips. Simple pleasure. A moment of indulgence. The pickled and the fried. Beyond sweets and pies, there was a whole world of preserved and pickled snacks sold by traveling vendors. One popular option: pickled onions or gherkins. These were carried in sealed clay jars, soaked in vinegar and herbs. Crunchy, sour, and oddly addictive. Some vendors also sold cheese curds, small, squeaky, and salted. These were easy to carry and didn't spoil quickly. And then, there was the rare treat, deep-fried dough. Made from leftover bread dough or chickpea flour, these were shaped into rough balls and fried in animal fat until golden brown. They were sprinkled with salt or powdered herbs, then dropped into a paper cone. A few coins, and your fingers were oily for the rest of the day. But no one cared. Sweet but questionable. Many medieval junk foods had uncertain origins. Peddlers didn't always make them fresh. Sometimes, they bought them cheaply from towns and resold them further afield. The result: a meat pie that had seen 3 markets and 4 days in a leather bag. Or a wafer made with river water. Still, people bought them. Why? Because in a world where meals were repetitive, gruel, stew, bread, repeat, these strange snacks brought color to the monotony. A hint of cinnamon. A trace of saffron. A rare taste of something exciting. Street performers and snack sellers. Some peddlers didn't just sell, they entertained. They would stand near taverns or churches, playing music, juggling, or telling tales while shouting the virtues of their wares. Hot honey nuts. Sweet as a maiden's smile. Only 3 coins for a taste of heaven. Children would gather, wide-eyed, hoping for a crumb. Sometimes they got one. Other times, just the story was enough. Social meaning of snacks. Interestingly, buying food from a peddler or street vendor wasn't just about hunger. It was about social experience. Villagers exchanged gossip over fried pastries. Young lovers shared dried apple rings while walking near the market. Old women compared whose pickled eggs were better bought or homemade. In many ways, these humble foods acted as bridges between people. Simple, greasy tokens of connection. The unwritten menu. There was no formal menu. No chalkboard. No pricing list. Just the peddler's booming voice and whatever his cart had to offer. Sometimes you got a plum tart. Other times, just stale oat biscuits. It was part of the adventure. Let us imagine the sounds now: the squeak of a wooden wheel, the jingling of copper bells, the hiss of oil still lingering on the fried dough, the rhythmic call of the seller, crooning like a bird, pastries, nuts, apples dipped in syrup. Come and get them while they last. A medieval village wasn't always lively, but on days like these, with the peddler in town, it felt like a festival. Even if the food was a little greasy. So as the sun sets behind the thatched rooftops, and the peddler gathers his empty baskets and jingling coins, he smiles to himself. He has fed not just bellies but curiosity, conversation, and craving, and for just a few moments, in a world of toil and silence, people tasted a little joy. All thanks to the wandering snack man. What about you, dear listener? What is the most unusual street food you've ever tried? Tell us in the comments, and let us know what city or country you're watching from. We love hearing where your journey meets ours. Stay with us now, as we move into Chapter 5, Drinks of the Poor, what they really sipped instead of water. Close your eyes. Let history drift over you like a warm blanket. Sleep is near. It seems like the most basic drink one could have. But in the medieval world, clean water was often harder to come by than gold. So, what did the average peasant sip when thirsty? What replaced water in the cups and bowls of the common folk? Tonight, we will wander into the taverns, huts, and cottages of the Middle Ages, not for food, but for drink. And what we find might surprise you. Water was not always welcome. In the medieval imagination, water wasn't always safe. And often, it wasn't. Rivers were used for bathing, washing clothes, dumping waste, and watering livestock. Wells could be polluted or too deep for daily access. So, while water was not absent, it was not trusted, especially in towns and cities. And so, the people turned to other options. Homemade, simple, and, more often than not, fermented. Let us sip slowly through a few of them. Small beer, the common man's drink. Perhaps the most famous water substitute in medieval times was small beer. But don't imagine anything like the bottles in modern pubs. Small beer was very weak in alcohol, barely enough to cause a buzz but just enough to kill bacteria. It was brewed by boiling water with barley or other grains, letting it ferment briefly, and then drinking it fresh. It was cloudy, sour, and sometimes smelled of bread. But it was safe. Even children drank it. Imagine waking up in your little cottage, sunlight filtering through the cracks in your wooden wall, and being handed a cup of warm, flat small beer for breakfast. Not to celebrate, but to hydrate. Possets and warm brews. On cold nights, people turned to warm drinks made from milk or ale, spiced with herbs or sweetened with honey. One such concoction was called a posset, a mix of hot milk and ale, often thickened and curdled slightly, flavored with nutmeg or cinnamon when available. To us, it might sound unappetizing. But to a medieval farmer, returning from a wind-battered field with aching bones, a posset was comfort in a cup. It warmed the stomach. It soothed the soul. Herbal infusions and tisanes. Tea, as we know it, wasn't yet in Europe. But the idea of steeping herbs in hot water was already in practice. Poor folk often gathered herbs like chamomile, mint, sage, or nettle, and brewed them into mild infusions. These weren't just for enjoyment, they were thought to heal. Got a headache? Try willow bark tea. Feeling sluggish? A dash of yarrow. Stomachache? Brew some fennel or aniseed. There were no branded teas, no bags, or labels. Just a kettle, a bundle of herbs tied with string, and the wisdom passed down from mother to daughter. The steam from the mug would rise in the quiet kitchen, mixing with the scent of burning wood. And for a few moments, peace would reign. Cider and perry, the fruit of the trees. In areas blessed with orchards, another beverage flowed freely, cider. Made from apples, it was often fermented at home in wooden barrels, producing a tart, bubbly drink that even the poorest could manage with some effort. In places with pear trees, perry was the alternative. While the rich imported wines from France, the poor sipped cider by the fire, slightly fizzy, a bit tangy, and always a reason to linger just a little longer by the hearth. In some villages, cider was not just a drink, it was celebration. Harvest festivals, weddings, even funerals were toasted with earthenware mugs filled with cloudy, golden cider. It wasn't refined, but it was real. Buttermilk and whey, dairy drinks of the farm. From the dairy came more than cheese and butter. Peasants often drank buttermilk, the liquid left after churning butter, and whey, the watery substance strained from curds. These were cold, tangy, and surprisingly refreshing. They were never served in goblets or poured in jugs of glass. Instead, a clay cup, chipped from years of use, would hold a ladleful of buttermilk. Sometimes salted, sometimes plain. Whey and buttermilk weren't glamorous, but they were daily drinks, easy to make, rich in nutrients, and surprisingly soothing after a long day under the sun. Mead, the honeyed drink of occasions. While rare for the poor, sometimes during a holiday or festival there might be mead. Mead was a fermented honey drink, golden and sweet, and could be as light as ale or as strong as wine. A peasant might only taste it once or twice a year. But that first sip, syrupy and floral, was like drinking summer in a cup. It was the drink of folklore and celebration, of marriages and midsummer songs. A drink not for thirst, but for joy. Drinking together, the social side. Drinking wasn't a private affair. Much like food, it was a social ritual. In small cottages, neighbors would gather around a hearth, each bringing what they could: a bit of cider, a flask of warm beer, a small pot of whey. Conversation flowed. Laughter rose. And while the drink was humble, the feeling of togetherness was rich. In the corner, an old man might tell stories from his youth, the steam from his herbal brew curling like ghosts toward the ceiling beams. Children sat quietly, watching, learning, sipping their small beer with wide eyes. And what of clean water now? Not all water was feared. In mountain villages, where springs bubbled fresh from the earth, water was clean, clear, and cherished. Those lucky enough to live by such sources drank it freely and sometimes even boiled it with herbs just for comfort. But in towns near cities, clean water was more myth than norm. And so, through necessity and habit, medieval people became brewers, fermenters, and infusers long before such terms were fashionable. What we learn from their cups. The poor of the Middle Ages did not have much. But they had creativity, resilience, and mugs filled with warm, nourishing drinks that told stories of their land, their work, and their survival. Every sip was an act of adaptation. Every cup, a small defiance against dirt, disease, and drought. So tonight, as you rest and listen, imagine holding a warm wooden mug, perhaps it's filled with nettle tea, or fresh cider, or weak beer, brewed by hand. Let the warmth of it calm your fingers. Let the steam wrap around your thoughts. And know that even in the simplest drinks of history, there was love. If you've ever tried a strange drink from your travels or even made your own herbal brew, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell us what country or town you're watching from. We're sharing these stories, cup by cup. Now, take another slow breath. Because next, we enter Chapter 6, Medieval Desserts, the sweet endings they dreamed of. Close your eyes, traveler. Let your mind wander to cinnamon, honey, and soft baked dough. Sleep well. Even in the hardest times, humans have always found a way to crave something sweet. A simple joy at the end of a meal. A reward after hours of work. A treat shared with a child. In the medieval world, where life was often harsh and full of labor, desserts were more than indulgence. They were hope on a plate. And tonight, as we conclude our gentle journey through medieval junk food, we turn now to the final, sweetest chapter. The desserts of the poor. The dreams they stirred. The taste of joy, even in the smallest bite. Sugar was a luxury, but honey was their gold. In the early medieval period, refined sugar was so expensive it was stored in apothecaries like medicine. It was used sparingly by the rich, often imported at great cost from distant lands. But the common folk had their own treasure, honey. Sweet, golden, floral, honey was the primary sweetener for most medieval desserts. It was gathered from wild hives or carefully tended by local beekeepers. A spoonful could transform a stale loaf into something comforting. And a drizzle over fruit or porridge could turn a humble dish into a dessert. It wasn't just food. It was comfort. Baked apples and pears, the fireside treat. Let us step into a peasant cottage. The fire burns low. The evening meal of bread and broth is done. And now, the matron of the house places a few apples near the coals wrapped in leaves, lightly brushed with oil or lard. They roast slowly, the skin blistering, the inside becoming soft and fragrant. Sometimes, a bit of honey or crushed nuts is tucked inside the fruit. The children wait eagerly. No crust. No sugar. Just the simple magic of heat and nature. A baked apple warm, fragrant, and better than any banquet. Pottage puddings, leftovers turned lovely. When times were especially lean, desserts were made from what was already cooking. Leftover grain pottage, a thick stew of oats, barley, or millet could be sweetened with dried fruits, spices, or honey. Served warm, it resembled a kind of primitive rice pudding. A spoonful might include stewed raisins, bits of apple or figure a dash of nutmeg or cinnamon, if available. A swirl of goat's milk or buttermilk. It was heavy, soothing, and surprisingly satisfying. You could eat it with your eyes half closed, letting the warmth lull you toward sleep. Fritters and fried dough. In market towns or on feast days, the smell of frying dough would drip through the air. Vendors would sell little lumps of dough, sometimes filled with dried fruits or nuts, deep fried in fat and drizzled with honey. They were crispy on the outside, soft in the middle. Not uniform. Not delicate. But for those who bought one with a single coin, they were perfect. Some were called crispels, flattened dough, fried and sweetened. Others were more like mini donuts, rolled in ground almonds or dipped in thick syrup made from boiled fruit skins. You could eat 3 in a row and still want more. Wafers and simple cakes. At churches and feasts, wafers were a special treat. They were made using hot irons like an early waffle maker into thin, crisp rounds, sometimes flavored with honey, rosewater, or cinnamon. Peasants rarely made them at home unless they had access to the right iron mold, but during holidays or weddings, they were passed around like gold coins. There were also simple honey cakes, flat, dense loaves made from flour, water, and whatever sweetener was at hand. Sometimes, dried fruits were baked inside. Sometimes not. But they were always shared, always remembered. Pies, tarts, and dreams of more. While meat pies were common, sweet pies were rare luxuries. Still, clever cooks made do. They would take coarse flour dough and press it into a shallow dish. Then they defill it with sliced apples, a few plums, mashed figs or pears, a spoon of honey or strong wine. If they were lucky, a sprinkle of crushed nuts or a shaving of hard cheese might top it. Then, it would bake in the coals or an outdoor oven until bubbling and browned. The result, a rustic fruit tart. Not too sweet, not too neat, but beautiful in its own way. Dried fruit, nature's candy. When winter came, there were no fresh desserts. But families often dried apples, pears, and plums on strings near the fire. These chewy treats would be nibbled on during long, cold nights. Children might unwrap a cloth bundle and pull out a wrinkled fig or a soft date from trade, saved for months. It wasn't much. But in the silence of a winter night, it was a treasure. Spices and symbolism. Spices were rare, but when they were used, they brought meaning. Cinnamon was said to warm the heart. Cloves were for strength. Nutmeg, for dreams. A dessert with spices wasn't just food, it was a blessing, a little bit of magic sprinkled into the everyday. And when neighbors shared spiced sweets, they shared more than flavor, they shared connection. Holidays and feasts, when sweets were sacred. On special holy days, Easter, Christmas, or Saints' Days, villagers would sometimes pool resources for sweet dishes. Communal puddings were stirred with hope and superstition, each person taking a turn with the spoon. Children would sing songs while treats were prepared. Some lucky homes even made gingerbread, a dense, spicy cake made with honey and breadcrumbs, cut into shapes and decorated with dried fruit. It was chewy, spicy, and slightly hard, like memory itself. Why sweetness mattered. For peasants who worked from dawn until dusk, a dessert wasn't just a dish. It was an escape. A reminder of joy, softness, and celebration. It made them feel human, not just tools of the land. A honeyed nut. A bite of fruit pie. A sliver of spiced bread. Each one carried stories, traditions, and hope. So now, as you rest, imagine that final bite of a medieval day. Maybe it's a warm baked apple, the skin crackling, juice steaming inside. Maybe it's a honey wafer shared with a neighbor by candlelight, or a cup of sweetened grain pudding, savored slowly by the hearth. Whatever it is, let it warm your spirit. Let it remind you, even in the hardest times, sweetness survives. And now, as the fire dims, as the stars settle above our imagined village, we close our story. Which of these medieval sweets would you want to try? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to share what country or city you're watching from. Your stories help keep history alive, one dessert at a time. Thank you for spending this hour with us. May your dreams tonight be sweet, and your sleep, even sweeter.